Hi, welcome everyone. Hopefully those online can hear me. Good morning. Welcome to the Northern Institute's People, Policy and Place seminar series for 2025. My name's Jackie Gould and I'm a Senior Research Fellow here at Northern Institute and one of the members of SAM's supervisory panel for his PhD. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we meet today. For those of us on site here in Darwin, it is the Larrakia people. We pay our respects to Larrakia elders, past, present and progressing, and further extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples joining us today. Today's seminar is presented by Sam Williams, who is a Research Fellow and PhD student here at Northern Institute, which explores what it means to be a modern anthropologist working in the Northern Territory. His collaboration with a group of elders in Maningrida has led to the explicit statement, "We need our own anthropologist." In this presentation, Sam recounts stories of the disparate professional anthropological roles, one enacting the procedures of modern legislated institutions, the other being authored as an Indigenous institution's own anthropologist, to inquire into the institutional work of the professional anthropological figure in the Northern Territory. I think this is a great project and embodies an important commitment not only to the Academy, but to the collaborations which genuinely respond to the research priorities of the Indigenous colleagues with whom we work as co-researchers. Sam comes to this work with a strong foundation in the Maningrida region, following 4 years as a West and Central Arnhem Land regional anthropologist with the Northern Land Council. And prior to this, he undertook his honours at Monash on the role of the anthropologist in ethnopolitical movements in Nepal, where he lived for 12 months. And he won a couple of awards for that honours work. In terms of housekeeping, probably most people haven't been here before. Come on in. Toilets are past the lifts and to the left. Emergency exits are before the lifts and to the left. Please turn your mobile phones onto silent or turn them off. And there will be a question and answer session at the end. So for those online, please put your questions into the Q&A section, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And for those in the audience, I'm going to duck out with my little person there, Hazel, and Danny Dog. So we'll listen upstairs so that we don't cause a ruckus. So I think Sam and the NI team here will support the Q&A session. And on that note, thank you for coming, welcome, and I'll hand over to Sam.
Thanks so much, Jackie. Very generous introduction. Yeah, my name's Sam, and it's great to see some friendly faces in the room and also lots of people online whose names I recognise. So thanks for coming along, and I'm glad there's a bit of interest. And I'm really sharing some quite preliminary thoughts today on the journey towards writing my thesis. And I'm hoping to kind of use this seminar as a bit of a testing ground for some of these ideas and really to get feedback from people and get some discussion going. So hope you can take it in that spirit, and I really look forward to hearing what people think about this. Before I start, I want to also acknowledge that we're meeting on Larrakia country and pay my respects to Larrakia elders, past and present, and acknowledge any Indigenous people who are joining today with us. I'm going to be speaking about the figure of the professional anthropologist in the Northern Territory, specifically in Arnhem Land. Why is that something that's worth talking about? Well, to persuade you that there might be some value in thinking about this, I want to take you to the Australian Anthropological Society's 2023 annual conference, which was held in Sydney at Macquarie Uni. That's the peak meeting for anthropologists around Australia every year. And there was a session at the conference in which the manager of the anthropology branch of the Northern Land Council presented as part of a panel to an audience of about 30 or 40 people. And it was a presentation about applied anthropological work at the NLC. And it became apparent during her presentation that there are more people employed as anthropologists at the NLC than at any anthropology faculty at a university in Australia. And that was a cause of a bit of surprise and some consternation for some members of the audience. Now, the NLC is one of 4 land councils in the Northern Territory. There's the Central Land Council, Tiwi and Anandiliakwatu, and all of them employ anthropologists to work for them. And as Jackie said, I used to be one of those anthropologists. These anthropologists are working to help the land councils to exercise the statutory functions they have under two bits of legislation, particularly the Land Rights Act and the Native Title Act. And someone here might be able to correct me, but I think that between those four organisations, they employ at least 40 full-time anthropologists, if not quite a few more. And the land councils are not the only people employing anthropologists in the Northern Territory. There's also ARPA and the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority that I'll be talking a bit more about later, and a few others. So I'm not quite sure if I can evidence this claim. Maybe my colleagues from demography would be able to help me to do this. But I contend that it's possible, if not likely, that there are more professional anthropologists working in the Northern Territory of Australia than maybe anywhere else in the world. And at least I think it could be the case that professional anthropologists make up a higher proportion of the workforce in the NT than anywhere else in the world. So in our context, there could be some value in thinking about these anthropologists. The other observation that I want to make at the outset is that in some parts of the Northern Territory, and certainly many parts of Arnhem Land, there are generations of Indigenous landowners who have been working with generations of anthropologists. I'm working with people in Maningrida whose parents and grandparents before them worked with anthropologists. So in February 2023, I was in a meeting of a group of elders from the saltwater country to the east and west of Maningrida, which is in central Arnhem Land up the coast. And we sat around this large table in the Bawinanga Ranger's office to discuss a new university research project that would also be my PhD. And during this meeting, one elder said, "We need our own anthropologist." And it was a statement that everyone present agreed with by saying, "Yo." And I've been very curious about this statement, "We need our own anthropologist." Why would a group of Indigenous elders in Arnhem Land think that it's useful for them to have their own anthropologist? Anthropology often gets defined in terms of its methods, ethnography, long-term participant observation. So did this group in Maningrida want, come on in, did this group in Maningrida want someone to follow them around with a notepad, undertaking long-term participant observation to write some words about their life and their culture in Maningrida? Or is it something more like Jennifer Deeger's collaboration in Gapawiak? She has an exhibition starting tonight downstairs that I'd highly recommend. But their group is looking to reclaim and renew the discipline of anthropology in very explicit ways to enable different knowledge systems to relate and inform a new understanding of what it is to be human. Lofty ambitions. In the rest of this seminar, I want to tell some stories of some of the things I've been tasked with doing as this group's own anthropologist. And these stories describe some of the contemporary rituals and routines that an anthropologist might be caught up in Arnhem Land. 3 jobs that I've been given to do as this group in Maningrida's anthropologist have been registering sacred sites with the Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority, finding archival materials from old anthropologists at IATSIS, which is the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, for those who might not know, but I'm sure most people here do. And the third thing is making videos. So in telling stories about these 3 different jobs, I'm not taking what anthropology is to be given or predetermined. I'm really trying to pay attention to the sometimes idiosyncratic practices of doing these jobs. These practices, which you could call procedures, routines, rituals, they're the practices of different institutions. And the anthropologist, me in this case, has accountabilities to these different institutions. Some are modern state institutions like IATSIS or the Northern Territory Sacred Sites Act. Some are Indigenous institutions like clans. Come on in. So I'm interested in the ways that the anthropologist is authored and authorized by these very different kinds of institutions. As a frame for these three stories, I want to prime you with a few questions that you might like to have in your mind. And I'm not going to answer these questions, even if they could be answered. I think I'm hoping to show that these questions are negotiated in particular times and at particular places. Who exercises authority in making anthropological knowledge? Or to put it another way, what institutions govern and authorize knowledge making? How is contemporary anthropological knowledge made, or by what institutional procedures is that knowledge work done? And where is anthropological knowledge located, as in place? What places are the institutional grounds of knowing? So just have those questions sort of maybe hovering around your mind, and we'll get started. These three stories. So from the very beginning of our partnership in Maningrida, an elder called Samuel told me that he wanted to register several sacred sites on Maung and Kunbarlang language country, which is to the west of Maningrida towards Goulburn Island. That's Samuel's mother's country and the country of his wife, Carol, and he has an obligation through kinship for the health and protection of these places. Samuel told me he'd been trying to get these sites registered with ARPA for many years. Among other things, he was particularly worried that young men living in Maningrida and Warrawee who don't know about these places would unwittingly trespass on them while fishing or hunting and be drowned or shipwrecked by sites of great potency. Samuel felt a good deal of responsibility for the care of both this younger generation and the country. So at intervals over several months, we sat down under his veranda at New Sub in Maningrida, and I wrote down the stories of 11 different places that Samuel hoped would be registered as sacred sites. As needed, we'd jump in the car and Samuel would take me to someone else's house. Jack at Bottom Camp, who had authority over stories on Marbunja clan country as the land he inherited from his father. Or Millie and Esther at Side Camp, who knew the Kunbarlang names for places that Samuel had forgotten, and several others. In between these recording sessions, I was in contact with ARPA in Darwin to find out how we might go about getting these places registered. I knew a few ARPA staff members, anthropologists who used to be colleagues when we worked together at the NLC, but I'd never worked for ARPA or navigated the process of registering a sacred site before. And ARPA gave us this form. The form sets out the information that's required under Section 27 of the Northern Territory Aboriginal Sacred Sites Act 1989 for a sacred site to be registered by ARPA. I was able to relatively easily extract sections from the notes I'd taken and fit them into the different categories that are in this form, things like the name of the site, a general geographic description of where the site is and what it looks like, any traditional restrictions on access to it, and so on. The anthropologist also appears on this form. On the first page, an anthropologist is instructed to record the following NTSSA, Northern Territory Sacred Sites Act, essential information, in addition to the information that's already listed on the page. Number 1, full story in notebook, not for public. Number 2, photograph. A, whole site and individual site features, brackets, no people in view. B, site and custodians. 3, GPS boundary of site and waypoint of each specific site feature. And 4, note all existing infrastructure assets within site boundary or nearby. Discuss detriment issues with landowner and custodian separately and note how to resolve. The anthropologist also has to sign their name on the form. So as the anthropologist, the form instructed me to take, among other things, to take a photo of the site features with no people and a photo of site with custodians. And I needed to get a GPS waypoint of the exact location of the site. Getting these GPS points and photos involved a 1-week helicopter trip where we moved 6 drums of jet fuel to a beach halfway between Warrawee and Maningrida, and then camped there and used the helicopter to fly to each of these 11 places. Samuel, Henry, and Jack, so Samuel's on the left, Jack in the middle, and Henry, led this trip. 3 elderly men with various kinship connections through their father or mother to the places that they wished to be registered. They guided me to each of the sites. They called out to their ancestors as we walked around. They put their sweat in the water They burnt the dry grass because it was the right time of year to do that. They visited places where family members were buried and piled baler shells there. Samuel, Henry, and Jack called some of the sites that they wanted to register Nyunyuk or Anjamun. These are the Maung and Kunwinku words, respectively, for places that are very dangerous, of dangerous spiritual potency. They discussed together how close we should go to these places, where to land the helicopter so that we wouldn't disturb them. They told the pilot to hover directly above the sites at quite a height so that I could mark the GPS waypoint of the location safely from the air rather than walking on the ground to the place itself and risking disturbance. When it was time for the anthropologist to photograph whole site and site with custodians, Samuel, Henry, and Jack discussed who the best person was to pose for the camera. For the sites to which none of them were related through their father or paternal grandfather, this was a very unsatisfactory arrangement, and they complained that the helicopter couldn't seat more people so that someone differently related to those places could be in the photograph with them. Some weeks after the trip, I submitted 11 signed sacred site registration forms to ARPA, along with the supplementary essential info as recorded by the anthropologist, me, including the GPS waypoints and the photographs. And some months later again, Samuel, Henry, Jack, and a few others came to Darwin, where we spoke to the board of ARPA about these places which they wish to have registered. And at the end of the board meeting, the chairman of ARPA stamped 11 pieces of paper to certify that these were now registered. The group returned to Maningrida with sacred site signs like the one you can see in this photo to erect at each of these 11 places, which say that the desecrator of a site could be penalized 200 penalty units. In this story, I was involved in quite precise sets of institutional procedures that included filling out forms, writing reports, evidencing these literary technologies with photos and spatial data. And it also included traveling with specific individuals to specific places such that we could constitute a moment where certain Indigenous landowners were present with the places that they own and that own them in quite a performative way. For Samuel, Henry, and Jack, this was one among many moments where they have enacted the unchanging intentions of ancestral beings in their right relationship by kinship to the sites in question. For ARPA, this moment became an authoritative moment in which they could ground a legitimate knowledge-making event, such that places which weren't registered sacred sites could become registered. This registration exists in perpetuity. It's not for a limited period of time. In the act of registering the sacred sites, ARPA vested authority in an increasingly historic moment at which certain individuals, including an anthropologist, performed their presence at certain places by doing certain things. The anthropologist is present as part of a complex assemblage of practices involving people, place, legislation, technology, expertise. The anthropologist is doing technical evidencing work to satisfy the institutional requirements of modern Australian legislation, while simultaneously following the institutional procedures of clan groups in enacting their ongoing ancestral relationship to places which they hold and which hold them. I suggest that this could be seen as inter-institutional knowledge work. It was accountable to multiple institutions. It was carried out in a way that was good enough to follow the very different procedures of these institutions in such a way that was efficacious for them. And the anthropologist in question was good enough in that he could get a helicopter and 6 drums of fuel, but not a really big helicopter that could have brought all the right people together at the same time, at the same place. Let's go to the second story. Finding archival material from anthropologists at IATSIS. Now, I mentioned earlier that I've been working with elders in Maningrida whose parents and grandparents worked with anthropologists. There are many anthropologists who've been around the Maningrida region, but foremost among these for the group I'm working with are Les Hyatt and Betty Meehan. Both Hyatt and Meehan worked with people they called the Gijingali, Barada speakers from the eastern side of Maningrida around the mouth of the Blythe River from the 1950s for several decades. Their name will probably be familiar to quite a few people here. Les Hite in particular is among the better known Australian anthropologists of the 20th century. So as part of their long-term ethnographic work, Hite and Meehan wrote copious field notes, they took photographs, they recorded film, and over the years they deposited their collections at IATSIS, who took over responsibility for these archival materials. And my partners in Maningrida were eager to see and use some of these materials, particularly photographs and videos taken on their country with them and their family who've since passed away. Betty Muraba, who is named after Betty Meehan, and her sisters Elva, Mirabelle, as well as Stuart, Oliver, and Dominic, wanted me to get hold of what I could. They'd seen some photos and videos that Betty Meehan had brought out to Maningrida herself a few years earlier, but no one still had any copies of the material that Betty had given them on a CD at the time. So I searched the IATSIS collections catalogue online for Meehan and Hite's archives, and I submitted an online request to access a list of these materials. That request was allocated to a collections access officer. He checked the access conditions of the material I'd asked to see, and after a few weeks, he gave me the all clear to come and view these materials at the IATSIS reading room in Canberra. And he even found a few extra parts of Meehan and Hite's collection that I hadn't been able to find myself. I was traveling through Canberra a few months later, so I lined up a day to view the materials that I'd requested. The collections access officer that I'd been emailing showed me to a small private room where he'd set up a computer with an enormous screen loaded with all of the archival materials from Hite and Meehan that I'd requested to view. He showed me how to navigate around the system. He told me I could stay until 4:30 and where I could find him if I needed help, and then he closed the door behind him and left. The next 7 hours passed in something of a blur. I was initially completely overwhelmed by the quantity of material on this computer. I had access to view several thousand photographs, more than 15 hours of film, hundreds of pages of scrawled notes. The collections officer had told me that I was allowed to extract small thumbnail versions of photographs that I wanted to show to those who'd sent me here from Maningrida. So I set about extracting as many of these thumbnails as I could, as if I was looting a bank before the alarms went off. Most of the photos had no captions. Some had captions that could be extracted separately. I occasionally saw names I recognized, people who I'd heard about from my time in Maningrida, part of the genealogy of people with whom I was working. I paused my frantic work momentarily on a photo taken by Betty Meehan captured, "Stuart wears a Pelican Bill hat." I checked the date of the photo, and sure enough, this could be the Stuart I've been working with in Maningrida. Don't tell anyone, but I took a photo of the photo with my phone, and I sent it to his brother on Facebook Messenger. I mean, it's a great photo, isn't it? I left IATSIS with a bundle of these thumbnail photos grouped together on A3 pages that I took with me the next time I went to Maningrida a few weeks later. Our group got together in the Rangers meeting room again. I set up the projector, turned off the lights, and zoomed in on these pictures as much as I could. And we spent several hours looking through the thumbnail versions of some of Hite and Meehan's photos. Faces were recognized, names were recalled. Photos that I'd copied in a room in Canberra were explained to me in terms of the relations of the people that I knew here in Maningrida. I relayed to the group what I'd been told by the collections officer, that if people wanted to get their own copies of this material, we'd have to make an additional return of material to Indigenous communities request by writing a letter. So as we were writing this letter together, Betty from Maningrida, who seemed a bit exasperated by the whole process, said, "Let's just call Betty." She pulled her phone out of her pocket, she dialed, and sure enough, Betty Meehan picked up. They spoke together in Barada for a minute or two, and then Betty in Maningrida said, "Ma, talk to Sam," and she put me on the phone. And so I found myself speaking to this 92-year-old anthropologist who couldn't have been more excited to hear about what we were doing and said that we could have copies of and use of any of her material that was held at IATSIS. So we added this fact to our letter, which we submitted to IATSIS last year. We were told that we'd joined the queue and it would be at least 10 months until our request was considered. And we're about 8 months into our waiting period at this point. Again, this story names various idiosyncratic institutional procedures by which anthropological knowledge is governed. To borrow the language of my supervisor, Helen Veron, from her work on ethnographic museums, IATSIS is an institution that is in place to give a great deal of care to the digital and physical objects that are in their collection, many of which are the product of historic anthropological knowledge making. They care for these objects by carefully categorizing them. Each of these thousands of photos has a unique code to identify it and locate it. They care for these objects by keeping a detailed record of their provenance and by doing research with communities if provenance is uncertain. They care for them by preserving their physical integrity, transferring light-sensitive film reels into digital MP4 files. One part of Betty's collection contained 6,480 feet of film reel that IATSIS have converted into a 3-hour-long MP4 file. They care for these objects by governing who can access and view them, who can copy them or use them, and by documenting and enforcing any restrictions that might be in place as to the audience of a particular item. When thumbnail versions of these objects made it to Maningrida, they began to pulsate with renewed life. Images that I'd frantically extracted from a computer screen in Canberra were enlivened by the institutions of clan, kin, and country. If the last story found a good enough anthropologist for sacred site registration work, this story finds a not yet good enough anthropologist. This not yet good enough anthropologist didn't know which of the thousands of photos to extract as thumbnails, which would be the most meaningful to his partners. This not yet good enough anthropologist needed some hand-holding. Betty in Maningrida had to put me on the phone with Betty in Canberra, gently forcing me to mobilize my anthropological genealogy to get on and do what she'd asked me to in the first place. And this not yet good enough anthropologist still hasn't managed to get copies of photos of the people he's working with and their families. Now to our last story, making videos. Registering sacred sites and tracking down archival materials have really been side projects from the main job that I've been given to do by my partners in Maningrida, which is making videos. At the same meeting I spoke about earlier, at which an elder said, "We need our own anthropologist," I was given a task by this large group to make a series of videos. In simple terms, the idea was that the right groups of people would go to places on their ancestral country and make a video there talking about that place. So that's what we've been doing over the last 2 years. The group around the Rangers table divided themselves into 4 filming regions that were mainly linguistically based, and they told me what order I should get to work in. Start with Maung and Kunbarlang country to the west of Maningrida first, then Martai Barada and Yanangu on the eastern side of the Blythe River, on the east of that map you can see. Then Jebana country closer to Maningrida after that, and finally Nakara and Anbara Barada on the western Blythe last. Filming in each of these 4 regions has involved a trip with people to their country. A rhythm has developed over time of movements between Darwin, Maningrida, and these filming locations, preparing food, camping gear, cameras, microphones, clapsticks, yidaki, making sure Dave, my videographer friend in Maningrida, was free to come and help film, moving people using 4-wheel drive vehicles, boats, and sometimes helicopters. By the time that we were actually at a certain place with the right people, mic'd up, looking down the lens with the camera rolling, I usually didn't have much of an idea of what they were actually going to talk about. But my job was largely done at this point. Editing these videos has also taken on its own rhythm. Spending time trying to get enough of a sense of what people are saying to come up with a starting edited clip that could be rejected outright or iterated and played with to be fashioned into something better by my partners. So rather than talk more, I thought I'd show you a version of one of the videos that feels particularly pertinent to this talk. This video is from a place called Jinawunya. Jinawunya is where Les Hyatt directed a well-known ethnographic film called Waiting for Harry. I don't know if probably some people in this room have seen it before. This film, the video I'm going to show you, Jinawunya, features Betty Nguraba, who I talked about earlier, and it features clips from Waiting for Harry in which her father, Frank Guramanamana, was the principal subject. And you might also see Les Hyatt if you look carefully.
Loka nyebru cikina mainge nyebrne kengar koroto mainge nyebrne ara paro mipa an ngair nyanyi parboro ke jala penani waiting for Harry mejala penani nip mejala penani with Les recounts ara paro petimin kengar pabrenagena and filmmaking abrni kengar mig pecang ke bernyor jeung abne an ko mig pengai pengwai ngenen nyera wal follow up ngenen nyera kongono kokong ngwai ngenen nyera marga ngaruna kabar mig pekengar dari cingi berkali bara arpnya bina para nyorkat nyorun pa misunderstood abndera kami pabrwere ngaya pat an ngair pa kengarap ngobrnagena koroto may ngobro cikina
mana nengeka ana ngal timeneka rapen beti pengeka urgana abri jenjere men ngaber pa argudi warpa argudi an baro pa men mo way men nire ngar dir ngada agun gunuga
I got a big fish now. Big whale. They growl. That's for fisherman. Oh. Stop that boat here.
Lapiti mang ni ngar ba ban penela ano raja kren ngan kanya nak berkabar mi ma
ngai chiming ko ngai ngandre kalmo de ange jachi nila ange jachi wal ngenya abarang mara kunang abarang mara ka ngadai ai tinga anguna kwatlo adol jinga rapanara nga 7 kilometers per obisi anggar ayunnya arugeloroka abrije pabrin ni abrigade kada jenunya galmakandi ngoyangandre jenunya raw ni ada amgijati mijbara nikta mandale panyewa amanga ni bara kunkuna nyubare agan kada norbo kerwaran fire mi pe galmakandi kungun ngoyangandre
Gatwanga connecting gananya from that one konjuang ibunan jere kene wait for Harry moving ngoyang I'm talking about movie merjala mana wait for Harry from that kamununga it says kene jangun kamununga ngara mala abang abayar kigunguna arjuman jerku ya jira abang ngar pegan ka bupa anu tingane mall magana gara arpanarangan ajunguna kal ngut kerenja arpegapwa anu tinganne mall ma anagara kudu special halal ngurjingan dan warna kan bal kenapa perwarna genggap kamu nunggu dulu korban aja kamu nunggu korban aja arah korban aja
marawanda
At this point, the souls of the deceased leave to join the community of the dead under the sea.
A story or wait for Harry. Follow that Kamunungu painting. Think about it. Listen carefully to the old people. Elders got the most power than us. We are second power. Second one, new generation. So stand up, talk up, whatever.
Rapangarman ngijin baya inan gara parangan bendu tira pakam menunggu kena pakawin ngina para. Mitpakan kena kepanggaraman ngijin baya. Kat cirenge pampang kaya nganat kenila. Gorda. Wen ngannya kada ka menunggu kena pakari dengerin parangan rapa. Men ka pamenyer petja. Wen ngendra ko ka mengapa. Ngerim parangan ngawal kaya.
In all, we've made 25 videos in 5 languages from country to the east and west of Maningrida. These are all the places that we've made a video about. Each video is about 10 to 15 minutes long. And we've inadvertently created our own archive that constitutes records of a contemporary moment in the ongoing collective life of these places along the coast of Arnhem Land. So much could be said about that video, Jinawunya. And while Jimmy talks a little about the Angajetia fish trap spirit of that place, much of the video feels like a tribute to the old film Waiting for Harry. Waiting for Harry is enormously important to the people I've been working with. As Betty said there, we're following up after what her father did with Les and Betty Meehan. A new generation anthropologist landowner partnership taking their turn. The video weaves together the old and the new, clipped side by side. Drone shots hover over the very place where the hollow log was erected in the movie. At the end of that video is a part of Waiting for Harry where Betty's father, Frank, says, "The emblems I hold so dear are now on a film, so the film is also dear to me." The film carries the emblems, the Gamanungu designs that are painted onto the hollow log coffin, such that the film becomes precious like the designs themselves. And what we've done is make a film that holds dear the film that carries these Gamanungu designs. Time is folded onto itself so that institutional knowledge is perpetuated and reinscribed in the present. So how do we draw these threads together? I'm sort of hoping that you might be able to help me do that, but I'll very briefly conclude with some tentative thoughts. Across all of these stories, this bumbling figure, our own anthropologist, has needed to be able to do all sorts of things. Things like using video cameras, filling out forms, being at certain places with certain people, doing collective memories, reinscribing past into present, working under guidance, mobilizing his anthropological genealogy. These jobs have involved moving back and forth, following the institutional procedures of various quite different institutions. I've sort of tried to show that this anthropological work is not institutionally located in one place, like a university or ARPA or a land council. It's work that's negotiated as sets of practices and routines in the here and now of each particular situation and place. The anthropologist is authored and authorized by these disparate institutions as a loosely bundled multiplicity. And being good enough to be a group's own anthropologist has not necessarily involved mobilizing the disciplinary concepts and methods of anthropology in order to know, but it is very much operating within an institutional history of anthropology and reperforming this history in and for particular purposes. I think there's a lot more to tease out there, but I think I'll probably leave it there and say thank you for coming along, and look forward to hearing people's thoughts, questions, and reflections. So thank you. I think we can open to questions from anyone. If you want to ask a question, there is a catch box that you need to talk into. But I should also say I heard the audio wasn't working for people online, so my apologies for that, but I hope the subtitles meant you could still get a bit of a sense of what the video was showing. Tash.
Thanks very much, Sam. I really enjoyed hearing about your work out in Maningrida and your reflections on anthropological practice in the past and the current, and obviously you'll probably have something to say about the future of anthropology along the way as well. I just wanted to ask you about, so at the beginning you put up a couple of questions, and so I was just wondering, but you said you weren't going to answer them, but are they the questions, you weren't going to answer them in this talk, but are they the questions that you're wanting to address in this paper or chapter as part of your thesis?
I'll go back to the questions, here they are.
And yeah, I was just interested to know a little bit about your kind of intentions with this piece of work. Is that going to be forming part of your thesis? And if so, wouldn't they be appropriate questions that you might try and address through the stories and the experiences and reflections?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. And I think, you know, a lot of anthropological research in general starts with some research questions that you go to a place and try to answer. This project just, as you can probably tell, has not played out that way by intention from the very beginning. And so I guess what I'm trying to do is find to sensitize myself to what was going on in the things that I was doing in such a way that some concepts, ideas, theory, something drops out of that that is a contribution in some way. It's sort of, I guess it's kind of the reverse. I felt like I needed to give some sort of framing to this to help an audience to make sense of it, but I don't think in terms of the way I write, it's going to be framed as, here are the questions that I was trying to answer and these are the answers, because that probably wouldn't be really honest to the situation that I found myself in as a PhD student. It's sort of the opposite, I guess. Does that answer your question? I think it's I've experienced that as a much, much harder way to do things, and have longed to have research questions that I was trying to answer in the field, but that's not the way things have gone, and there's good things about that too, so yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much.
No, that's right.
Thanks. That was a great talk, and as technically I'm an archaeologist, but I do lots of archival research, etc. So talking about those processes of the forms going to IATSIS or the archive and being like, oh, I want to access this, then having to go back to community and say like, oh yeah, there's this weird technicality that we have to do. All of that in itself is like a great discussion. But my question is actually kind of around the idea of knowledge making and institutions. Given that Betty Meehan was also an archaeologist and worked with archaeologists, did you include the archaeology side of things in your like archival research, etc., or did you keep it to anthropology, and why?
Yeah, great question, and glad that people know Betty Meehan. She would be stoked. She emailed me the other day. She is releasing a book at 92 that's coming out in October. So amazing, an amazing lady. No, I wasn't looking for any archaeological stuff. Basically, I was just looking to find the things that the people that I was working with in Maningrida wanted me to find, which was really photos and videos.
Yeah. I mean, but given that a lot of archaeologists have photos and videos in there.
Yeah, so Betty's archive that I was looking through wasn't sort of separated out into archaeological stuff and anthropological stuff. But the photos, there were lots of photos that I didn't extract thumbnails of that were photos of shell middens and photos of barramundi lined up that she was weighing to see, like a lot of her early research was about, you know, quantities of things consumed and so on.
Yeah, no, I meant more, there's often also photos of people in those archaeological archive collections. Whether you had the chance or thought about like looking into that side of it.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is I wasn't differentiating within her archive if something was anthropology or archaeology. I was looking for people wherever it's at. Yeah.
I'm actually going to throw this thing.
Hi. Look,
hi, Wendy.
I'm really excited, and I think it's just wonderful what you've been able to do, and you're giving me lots of ideas about trying to resource some of our anthros, doing more of that. I do want to give positive feedback on your second presentation, the photos. So in 2021, IATSIS convened something about return of materials, and the idea was it would come back from anthros, archaeologists, linguists, historians, lawyers, and then initially it was coming back to IATSIS, but in fact the NLC and CLC said no, it should come back to us because we'd heard plenty of stories about the problems of accessing stuff at IATSIS. So in 2023, we started a project, NLC and CLC, where we've now got ways of encouraging old staff and old consultants to hand back stuff to the Land Council with the intention of handing it back to the TOs. So our pilot project was Tony Bowman, who some of you may know. She's worked in VRD and Catherine since the 80s as a consultant, as a staff member. She sent us 60 boxes of materials. Took us 6 months to sort through them all with her support. 3 weeks' time, I'm happy to tell you, we're going out to Timber Creek to show a whole lot of photos. We've been working very closely with TOs, including Josie Jones, who's one of the key people out there. I'm really excited about it because that's our pilot to actually return, and they've actually requested this be a community photo display of all the photos she has, and we're actually being instructed by the TOs. They said there doesn't have to be restrictions on people who are now deceased. So I'm actually really excited to see what you're doing as well, and hoping that I can get some money for some of our anthros to do more of this recording work, because I think of the photos that I didn't take 20 years ago, which I regret. Obviously you need permissions, but some of those old archives are so fantastic, and it's great that Betty is still alive, because we're hoping to we're hoping to encourage other retired consultants and staff who have a whole heap of materials in their storerooms. And I know some of you may know Robert Graham. We know he's probably got a whole household full of it. So look, it's fantastic, and I'm really excited about what you're doing. And I guess the other comment I want to make is obviously you need a lot of resources, and you also need technical skills as well as your anthropological skills. So we sort of need to be multifaceted people assisting TOs. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. Oh,
Ellie.
hi, Ollie. How you
I guess I was curious with the videos that you're being asked to make. What are the TO's intentions with those, seeing as they're seeing how frustrating the process with IATSIS is and how a lot of these, the formality of those processes. What are their intentions with those videos?
Yeah, it was a question that I've kind of had from the beginning, and it's only really kind of emerged in practice. First and foremost, they're videos for those people and their family to watch. I've been, buying office works out of 5 packs of USBs. Most people have TVs, and you can plug a USB into the TV slot. USB into the slot on a TV, and so lots and lots of copies of everything has just been going to people in Maningrida to watch themselves and show to whoever they want to. We will be kind of handing over that archive, I guess, if you want to call it an archive, all these videos from these places to the school in Maningrida as something for them to use as part of the language and culture program. Actually, in a few weeks' time, we'll be going out. We've made with a colleague, Rowan, at the Northern Institute, we've made a 3D map of this exact area that you see here. It's about 2 meters by 1.5 meters with a projector over the top of it. So you can see the country and you can kind of click around on it, interact with it, and click on a place and a video of that place pops up that we've made. It's a kind of, the idea is that would be like a kind of teaching tool, I guess, in the classroom under the instruction of the elders who've been involved in the video making. I don't know what will happen with them long term. Maybe one day some poor soul will be looking in the IATSIS archive for Williams's videos or something, but I doubt that. Questions online. Okay, do you want to read them out with the box? Where's the box? Or I can give you that one.
Hi team. Okay, we have some questions online and we'll just get Sam to pick 1 or 2.
Oh, okay, cool. I'll can I keep this laptop?
Yes.
All right. Oh, awesome. Cool. Thanks. Hi everybody online, and thanks for your questions. There's a lot of them, so I'm just having a quick squiz through them. Okay, I'll Andrew, thanks for your question. In short, I've emphasized practices, thinking of anthropology as a kind of useful practice, but what value does this kind of work have to the discipline of anthropology itself? That's a great question, and I feel very, very nervous to answer it because anthropology, discipline like university anthropology, let's say, is such a multifaceted beast. But I would probably see this as falling somewhere within kind of research that's trying to rethink the relationships and the ways that the relationships, I guess it kind of fits within that decolonizing research methodology space, thinking about different ways to do research that gives avoids doing epistemic injustice by trying to work in epistemic good faith between knowledge practices. That's a bit of an abstract answer, and I'm still kind of really thinking through that, but maybe that's the answer to that one. Do you think the knowledge making you participated in would be different, and how, if the knowledge collector had not been Balanda but Aboriginal or a member of the group you're working with? That's also a great question. I think in our particular circumstance, the particular people that I've been working with at this particular time, it has been important that I am not them, because it's allowed me to, I guess, operate between these different institutions as some sort of a person moving around being multiple. And maybe I'll just leave that answer there. A question from oh, that one's a bit of a half question. Sorry, Kirsty, I couldn't quite see what the original part of that question was. From Simon West, thanks so much, Sam. Could you talk about the differences, similarities between your previous role as an anthropologist in the NLC and working as a Maningrida group's own anthropologist? That is a great question too. And I deliberately didn't really talk about the NLC as part of this presentation, partly because I actually don't have university ethics approval to do that. That's just, it's not really been a subject of the project. But of course, these things are very, very different. Like I said before, NLC anthropology, you're working under, you're sort of primarily, I would say, NLC anthropologists operate that they are institutionally accountable to legislation. And they're always, you know, NLC anthros in the room and online, correct me if I'm wrong, but always trying to push back against lawyers who are saying, this is our institutional role and we shouldn't step outside of this. And it sounds like maybe Wendy and others are finding ways to make themselves multiple so that they can do other things. But that was definitely my experience, that that NLC work really has a primary accountability to legislation, and that very highly shapes the way that you relate to the people that you're working with and what you do with them. Nori has asked, your commitment is more than what conventional anthropologists would do, so you call yourself a not yet good enough anthropologist. Do you still see yourself as an anthropologist or something else? Nori, I don't have a clue. I think, to be honest, my main intention in the relationships I've had with people in Maningrida, who I knew all of them quite well before I started the PhD. The main object of this whole thing has been to just do the stuff that they want me to do and try and be useful. And I haven't particularly worried about whether that's anthropology or something else. And now, after doing a lot of those things, I found myself in a kind of unfortunate position of having to try and make sense of all of that and make that into a thesis somehow, which, as I said before, I've not found easy. And thinking about that in terms of what my job has been as an anthropologist is one lens, I guess, to do that. But yeah, whether I call myself an anthropologist or not, I don't know. Depends who's asking. Two more questions. Bree Blakeman, I've read some of your work, Bree, though we've never met, and I think it's amazing. So thanks for tuning in. A comment and a question. The role of power and the authority of the settler state seems like a fruitful thread that you could explore in your role as a presentation, in your role as an anthropologist. Great point. And secondly, Indigenous co-researchers often view their relationship with anthropologists with whom they have long-term relationships as reciprocal. Is this true in your case? I wonder how foregrounding reciprocity might recast the questions you've posed. Yeah, thanks, Bree. That would definitely be using a kind of typical category or concept of disciplinary anthropology, reciprocity, and using that to make sense of my relationships. And I think that would definitely be true. I've been trying to do the things that that are useful for the group, and I guess the reciprocity is that I've got fodder to make into a PhD thesis and make sense of. And that is the institution of university anthropology located within the academy, also being a player within this whole interface. So yeah, that's definitely one way to make sense of these long-term relationships. I'm sure many people who are part of this talk, including yourself, Bree, have a lot of experiences of what it means to be a group's own anthropologist. yeah, and I'd really love to hear those at some point as well. Last question from Nick Bidwell. How do you handle institutional processes that expect the rituals of RQs, for example, ethics? Yeah, someone else should answer that, I don't know. Probably the honest answer is with a great deal of pragmatism, which is probably the same as the interactions with IATSIS or ARPA, is to do the things that the group in Maningrida want me to do, has involved trying to pragmatically navigate various processes so that I can be useful for them. I think there's some real deficiencies to that way of doing things, because it means I probably haven't maybe intellectually reflected or interrogated what those processes are very much until now. I've just sort of tried to get through them as best I could. Yeah, so that's not much of an answer, but yeah. I think that's it. Unless anybody has last one from the room. All right, where's the box? Oh, it's over there.
Thanks, Sam. I really enjoyed your talk, and I'll probably just make a few statements rather than put out some tricky questions.
Fantastic.
A couple of things struck me. One was the genuine interest in the genealogy of anthropological knowledge making, and it seems to me that you're tracing that in some way, just looking at what's done in the past. But it's also the link with the archival material I found really, really interesting. And in that statement that you had on screen about that film also being dear to the speaker. But what flipped to me then was that form that your name turns up with the IAPA. And it's something to do with what that material product is, what those archives continue to do into the future, which may not be obvious when that anthropological work is ongoing. And so it was the link between the material presence and the archives that are produced and what those archives continue to do. And sometimes that relationship between the archive back to country is not well understood.
Yeah. Thanks, Christine. That's such a fantastic point. And yeah, I've been fascinated in tracing my genealogy, and it's funny because I think you've got a genealogist in the room. You could really draw up a genealogy from Radcliffe Brown down of PhD supervision. And I think people have actually done it. I have a feeling that Yaz Mushabash at ANU has done that before, where, you go from Radcliffe Brown to, Hyatt to Nick Peterson to today, it's actually not that many generations. But I've been exploring that mainly in terms of the relationships to the group in Maningrida, and they talk about Hyatt and Betty Meehan all the time. And that's, those long-term relationships are much more than anthropological research relationships, and loads of things have fallen out of that I'm sure. I'd love to ask Betty about whether she anticipated that when she was out there in the 50s and later on. But yeah, who knows what will become of all the material artifacts of this project down the line. Sorry.
I think we should give a round of applause for Sam for doing such a fabulous job. Thank you, Sam, for sharing your research with us.